in the 60s, that's when communities were left to face the brunt of all these health effects. So by creating this publicly accessible map, we've been able to make this data, first of all, understandable to the average person. We've had community members participate in events where we gave them tutorials on how to use the map. We handed it out on USB drives because a lot of residents don't have solid internet access. And people have been advocating against their local agencies about it, asking questions on remediation. And they've been able to do a lot of their own advocacy work, which has been really exciting to see. So that's a bit about my project. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing. All right, I'm gonna pass it back off to Janina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Janina Jeff, scientist and podcaster. My project is called In Those Genes. It's a podcast that uses genetics to decode the lost histories and futures of African descendants. We are an independent podcast that started in 2018 after winning a very competitive competition with Spotify, which was aimed at getting women of color in podcasting. We were selected one of 3 winners out of a pool of 18,000 people at that time. Better grant odds than I've ever had in my academic career. But we used that funding to start our first season, which is called 46 Chromosomes in a Mule. And really that first season uses direct-to-consumer genetic ancestry testing as an entry point to engage with the Black community specifically on genetics education. That season was very successful. We won numerous awards. We've had features on NPR. And afterwards, we decided to go on with season 2. And so season 2 is centered all around physical traits that are often ascribed with race. And so in season 2, we have 6 amazing episodes that took almost a year for us to produce. And these episodes feature topics that talk about the genetics of aging, the genetics of athleticism, the genetics of rhythm, the origins of our physical features and the history of humanity, of how they came to be. And more specific, in probably our opening episode that season is called How the World Inherited Blackness. And we start with race and talk about how race was created, and go more in depth, and also how race has now been misused, and how science and pseudoscience has kind of shaped how race and medicine engage. And then in our last episode in season 2, we focused on the genetics of body shape. So season 2 aired at the end of last year and through spring of this year. And now we are in the process of doing fundraising for season 3. And season 3 will also be talking about the genetics of traits that are often ascribed with race, but now taking a step back from the physical characteristics and diving deeper into the psychology. And so in this season, we'll discuss topics like the genetics of intellectualism, the genetics of hypersexuality, the genetics of aggression, as well as the genetics and epigenetics of trauma and or joy. And so these are some of the highlights that we're planning to do in season 3. We are right now in the fundraising phase. We have been really fortunate enough to receive fundraising from the Greater Good Science grant on intellectual humility, which is a foundation of the work that we do, which is this concept that scientists and academics and everything that we know about science is also up for question, right? And it should be challenged. And so in every episode, we use intellectual humility as really an anchor to talk about the lack of research around these topic areas, particularly in the Black community. And so we're hoping to start our production of season 3 sometime in the spring of next year. But if you are interested in listening to season 1 or season 2, they are evergreen podcast episodes, and they are often used in college curriculums. And so we've been able to make a huge impact in that way. A lot of the episodes are used in college curriculum. Notably, one of our in season 1, we were contacted by a professor who teaches genetics and evolution at a state prison at Northwestern in Illinois. and learned that even our transcripts that we produce from the podcast have been aided and useful in non-traditional education systems as well. And so we're really excited to continue on. We are about a team of 12. It's crazy how our team has grown so much, but a team of 12 journalists, scientists, college interns, fact checkers, audio engineers, music producers, working hard to make sure that this show is possible. And of course, it would not be possible, especially season 2, without the funding of Fellowship Fellowship for the Future and 500 Women Scientists. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Janina. We love being able to support you and all of your fellow fellows in any way possible. Next off, we're gonna go to Kendra.
Hi there, my name is Kendra Kruger. I work at CUNY's, that's the City University of New York, as advanced science research, little hobby electronics. And then once the pandemic hit and many of these mutual aid movements were happening across New York City, it really inspired me to think about like, how can we really leverage this kind of do-it-yourself technology to these different community organizations to be used on more of like this hyper local level where we could have these sort of like community tech, eco tech hubs that could be deployed or utilized in different ways. So we then started to work with different community organizations that had their own youth or workforce development program to develop trainings that would integrate into their programming where students or community members could come to our lab and learn how to build these technologies and then also learn how to teach others how to build these technologies. So we now just finished this past summer our first pilot of our community training program where we had folks from 18 to 50 years old that came and worked in the lab with us. And we really see this, so at the end of it, folks are able to come away with their own DIY air quality sensor that can measure carbon dioxide, pressure, temperature, humidity, and particulate matter. And then the data can all be sent through via Wi-Fi to a Google spreadsheet and then put on through a widget on a website. But besides from coming away with an actual, device that can be measuring these things, which look at, environmental justice on a hyper local level to see how specific neighborhoods are being impacted by, pollution in different ways, they're also learning a lot of STEM skills in the process. We're learning coding and circuits and environmental science. They get to be in the university space. They get to interact with scientists, and we really are focusing on lowering that barrier of entry, into the sciences and into STEM fields, and making connections with different pathways that they can take into the university or into internships from that point, and also seeing the value of how do we also highlight the knowledge that exists in these local communities, that it's not just in the ivory tower of the university, but that wisdom exists across all divisions of our society. And so creating that reciprocal space where those voices can be decision makers also in these academic spaces and in research as well. And yes, thank you to Fellowship for the Future for funding us.
Of course. All right, and lastly, we're going to have Jasmine speak.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jasmine Drake. I'm at Texas Southern University, which is in the heart of downtown Houston, and I am the interim chair of the Department of Administration of Justice, and I am a forensic scientist by training. And so my project, which was funded, is called STEMusphere. And this project was for middle school girls. And the goal of this project was to introduce middle school girls and increase their excitement and confidence with science and STEM and learning. And, I had some notes I was going to say, but I have a 9-year-old daughter, right? She's Black, she's beautiful, she's talented, everything. And at 9 years old, already, she came home from school today. I had to turn my camera off and comfort her because a girl didn't want to be her friend anymore because she was a smart girl. Do you want to just be known as that smart girl? And all of the positivity and everything that we poured into her, just one person, one naysayer was enough to have this confident, beautiful girl in tears. So and I just thought about what we do here in the project, and I love, this is very necessary, this thing of not being isolated and having all of this confidence in one person being able to take you off track. And so why I love the project that I do is that I was motivated at the lack of diversity. The National Science Foundation puts out a survey every year. And every year I look at those results and I notice that there is a lack of women and minorities in the sciences and in STEM careers and fields. And so I want to do my best to actually encourage girls, women and minorities, and the guys too, but the women and minorities especially, to pursue STEM careers and to increase diversity in these fields. For my project, we were able to have summer camps for students. We also do different training activities. At TSU, we have a forensic science learning lab. There we have like a mock crime lab, and that's why you see the crime scene stuff behind me. So we were able to actually have students participate in this program based on the proposal and the funding that I was able to get from 500 women scientists. I was able to use their critiques, feedback, and encouragement to write a proposal to get funded by the National Institute of Justice and DOJ. So we were able to get another project where we had student groups come in. Then COVID happened, so we had to kind of switch it up and do virtual, but the students all got care packages that had their CSI science kits. They were able to have an instructor 5 days a week for 3 weeks, where they did hands-on forensic science. They had lectures, and they also engaged with, this grant was with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. So we wanted to bridge that gap as far as the students' attitudes towards law enforcement and working with law enforcement. And so to have some type of engagement with law enforcement as well as scientists. And so the students worked. We had various groups, I think maybe about 75 students. It gets to be a lot after 25, but the students really enjoyed it. They were engaged. They were they loved doing all of the hands-on things, and they actually culminated their project with a fairy tale mock trial. And I mean, I would not want to be on the stand with any of those kids because they were the attorneys. They played every role. And so just a really great thing. Some of the highlights from working on this project is just seeing, students, their interests and their eyes lighten up. And a lot of times when I go into talk to all of these different groups, you ask them, what does a scientist look like? And they definitely don't, describe me. I don't look like a scientist to them. So my goal is to show them the model of what a scientist can look like. And by actually seeing someone that looks like themselves, that they can model that behavior. Because for a lot of kids, it's representation matters. And so just being able to get out there in this platform actually supporting me, I've been able to get calls to go into different schools and different places. I'm like, how did you even learn about me? I've recently been on College Hill and also been called for some different science documentaries, one that'll be coming out in January. So the opportunities that I've been afforded based on working with 500 women scientists have been instrumental in helping me to actually put forth that representation and show, get girls to be interested in science.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, and thank you to all of our panelists for describing your projects and letting us know why and how important they are. With that being said, we're going to move into our question and answer segment so we can dive in a little bit deeper to get to know our panelists. Due to our time allotment, though, I'm only going to choose one panelist to answer each question. We have about 4 questions. If you do not want to answer the question, if you don't feel prepared to, that's totally fine. I can always pass the question along to someone else, so don't feel obligated to answer something. So for our first question, this is going to go to Janina. What was your motivation or reason for getting involved and for developing your project? And when or how did you connect your passion for your STEM field with your community, with the Black community's needs and the reality of being a Black person in the States?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, to be honest with you, when I first started thinking about the podcast and the need of the podcast, it really came out of at the time I was doing my postdoc at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I was getting tapped to be a speaker, to be a public speaker, and to do all these speaking engagements. And mind you, I don't have like this extensive speaking background aside from like speaking at science conferences. But I was asked to give like TED style talks and TED talks, and I didn't understand why. And it was simply because people were going on Google and researching Black woman geneticists, and I was the only person that was coming up. I am not the only Black woman geneticist, but I guess I was the only one at that time that the internet had grabbed a hold of. And so I really started there and started doing some public speaking. And it really became apparent to me that whenever I would tell someone in my community that I'm a geneticist, I would hear a couple of like same questions. And some of the questions were specific to the Black community, and some of the questions are just specific to non-scientists. One of the main ones I would hear a lot is, "Oh, do you clone things? Do you, do you clone animals or people?" And that one is not necessarily specific to the Black community per se, but it would kind of led me to believe that there's a big misconception about what genetics is and what geneticists can't do, and what our normal practices is to the lay public. And then another one I would hear, this is in my personal experience, not being a geneticist at all, but people would ask me, "What am I?" Which is a very derogatory question. Anytime, your physical features don't ascribe to what someone believes to be a certain race, you always get this question, "Well, what are you?" And then where are you from? And I think a lot of people don't realize how offensive that question or that line of questioning can be. But particularly in the Black community, we have so many different ways physically and personality wise of being Black, and that it seemed that genetics, or I should say what people assume to be genetics, began to be a big explanation of that. And then another question I would hear would be, "Well, what are these companies doing with my data? And is it accurate? Is it true?" Big questions around consumer genetic ancestry tests, and people wanting to find out or say that their identity is unknown because of it being dependent on these tests. And so all of that made me realize that there was a huge gap in the community around a general understanding of genetics. I feel like genetics is a very kitchen table discipline, where if we just all finished Thanksgiving, if you were sitting with your family or having dinner at any time, you hear a lot of people in family conversations say things like, "Oh, well, she laughs like that because of her mom," or, they do this because of so-and-so in the family. And so genetics is something that we actually talk about a lot in terms, when I compare it to the other disciplines as a community. And so in those genes really came to kind of serve as this place where we can teach genetics and remove all the accessibility blockers. And one of the big things in that is that the language of genetics and science in general is very Eurocentric, white, and male. And so just the words themselves and the way we teach them are already very exclusionary. And so we thought In Those Genes podcast will be a place where we can make genetics accessible to the Black community through language, but also through culture. And so if you listen to the show, whenever we describe or teach a genetics concept, we're always using a cultural touch point so that our listeners feel heard and also can relate to. So we don't white explain any of our cultural touch points, because the point is that the show be able to touch on a subject or some type of familiarity that you have in a communal way to help you learn a particular genetic concept. And so we believe that the language itself is exclusionary. And so by changing the language and making the language a culturally attuned, as well as incorporating cultural touch points such as music, we have a lot of hip hop that's played in the podcast, will really create this safe space and really unique tool for adult learners in the Black community. And so that was kind of our mission and kind of what we, hope to achieve, and which we've been really successful at achieving so far. I tell everyone, in those genes is very specific to the Black community, but there should be a equivalent in those genes for every other community, because each community has its own touch points and its own culture that we can use different words to better convey these concepts and really, really teach genetic literacy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janina, for that insight. I forgot to mention, thank you once again, Janina. If our remaining panelists, if we could stick to about 2 to 3 minutes for our answers, just because of our allotment of time. Moving on to our next question. This is going to be for Jessica. Jessica, how do you navigate the culture or language of your STEM field within your project? And how do you navigate that with the local culture and language of the Indigenous population where your program is taking place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, as a grad student studying natural resources, and then also working in a team that involves like GIS, like specialists, and then community activists, we always start from the point of like, okay, what do we all know collectively, and how can we kind of figure out the bridges that need to be made in terms of like explaining vocabulary or jargon and terms, because not everyone knows what like ArcMap, the software, is. Like that itself is very simple to a scientist, but not necessarily simple to the layperson, and reasonably so. So making sure that explaining terms from like a very introductory standpoint, but not in a way that is demeaning or patronizing as well. It's been a really fun team though to do that collaboration in, because with everyone in a different field and a different background, we all get to like learn a little bit about what an activist is like or what a GIS specialist is like, and it's just been really fun and collaborative. So having a lot of humility has been really helpful for us.
Thank you so much. Our next question, this is for Jasmine. What has been the most challenging barrier to balancing your personal life, academic career, and your community organizing?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. And I think we've talked about this a little bit to me. So great question. For me, I'm a mother of two, married, and, I have a pandemic baby. So I had a baby during the pandemic. So I have an 18-month-old, and I don't have it all figured out as far as balancing and making a healthy, work-life balance, but we're working on it. And, the thing for me is, I get advice from other people who are doing the things that I want to do. And, like as far as working and being an administrator, that's a different role for me. And some of the ladies that were in my cohort, we actually even shared me turning this job down before. And so they weren't willing to pay me my worth. So I turned the job down. And then a year later, they came back and they came correct, so even within this organization, they've offered me support as far as not taking less than my worth, and actually balancing and realizing if I have to do extra work, that's a trade-off. That's time I'm going to spend away from my family, so I have to be compensated for it. And so just looking at, I was doing all kind of work for free all over the place. I still do a lot of free work, but I was doing a lot of free work, and I had to realize that, hey, if I help this attorney, most people charge a consulting fee. So I've since started working on cases with attorneys and doing some consulting. And so it's definitely helped me with balancing the things that I do.
Thank you so much. As a mom myself in STEM, I know how difficult it is to balance and to make sure you're giving your babies all the attention that they deserve. So thank you for that. And lastly, this is for Kendra. How do you refuel your body, mind, and psyche after all the incredible work that you do on a daily basis?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, definitely sleep. That's the number one thing that I try to do. And I think I've really leaned into like trying to find really simple routines really simple little kind of almost like rituals that make me feel like I'm sort of like stashing love for myself in my own home. You know, my home has become like such a sanctuary for me that is like essential. Having a safe place. For a while I was living in not such a safe situation, and it just makes such a difference, like for mentally. And you know, little things, even just like making my bed in a certain way and just having my Sunday routine that is like where I have my little loops that I go through the city to the farmers market to the shops and say hello to like all the same people. Just in little like simple things like that have become really special and sacred to me, that make me feel rooted and grounded, so that I can sort of like get more into the chaos and the uncertainty of living in the rest of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And self-care is so important. And that's something that, as the manager of the program, I really stress for all of our fellows. And I just want to thank you, all of our fellows, all our panelists, for sharing your time and your personal lives and your projects with us this evening and with our audience. And I hope that our audience has taken away some really great points and are as inspired as I am, and I'm sure as the rest of our staff are. All right, I'm gonna pass it off back to Kelly. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you, fellows, so much for joining us today. I wish that we all lived in the same place so I could be your friend, because you have such great wisdom. Janaina, I want to, like, your whole time talking, I was thinking about every genetics for my class and how to bring that into the classroom. So thanks for such great points. Everyone, thank you again for sharing this with 500 Women Scientists, with our supporters. You are such a critical component of 500 Women Scientists. We hope to and plan to continue to grow the fellowship. Since we started the fellowship, I've seen more programs for women of color getting paid for the work that they have already been doing. And I like to think to myself that might be a little bit because 500 Women Scientists makes that a priority in one of our projects. And I hope that larger organizations continue to make it a priority, that universities make it a priority to pay people for their work. It's just so important, and will make it so we can, people will not fall out of the cracks, like from some of the stories that we heard earlier, that people will see the role models, the people that look like them. I hope we can continue to do that. So thanks so much, panelists. Thanks, Tony. So we are just drawing to the end of our session. We have one more raffle for everyone. We have this really cool hat made by Urban Native Era. And you can follow them on Instagram and Twitter. And the hat says, "You are on native land." You actually can buy these hats now at REI. They're very cool, like hip 90s hats. But I just love supporting this native owned company. And Jennifer Adkins is the winner. So Jennifer, we will contact you and get your mailing address, and you will get one of these very cool hats. So thank you to all our ticket purchasers for supporting us today. We raised, so our goal was 5,000. We always, it's hard to raise a lot of money sometimes, but that's not my sound. We made, actually, I think we hit 45% of our goal. So just over, let's see, 2261. So thank you everyone for supporting through ticket purchases, through donations. And this does not include the auction items, which are still up for grabs. And while we did tell you that it goes until, 5:22. It looks like for some reason I have the bidding set until midnight tonight. So if I forget to change that, you have all night to bid on these cool items. It looks like people have bid on the custom illustration, but that's still open. You could bid on a signed book, our Women's March photo, the very cool bags, BAB bags. and the watercolor bookmarks. So check those out sometime in the next couple of minutes or later tonight. And so this is the end of our fundraiser, our first and hopefully first of many fundraisers that we will have celebrating the work of 500 women scientists. Thank you everyone who donated to this event, who put in time. Thank you panelists and storytellers for taking time to put together such thoughtful stories and answers today. It was so meaningful to hear these different stories. And really, I love this photo, like looking at all these photos of some of our leaders here on this slide. You can see all these lovely faces, and seeing our panelists and storytellers today just adds to this collage of awesome humans that contribute to this organization. We're so grateful for your support and to have you here. And we hope we can continue to support you all in the future with the fundraising, not only from our supporters, but from our larger funders who help support our programs and fund some of our staff and operations. So thank you again. Happy Giving Tuesday. Have a great evening, morning, whenever you end up watching this. Again, I know you'll put it on repeat. And I want to thank one more time the staff who were just so critical to organizing this event: Nicole, Anushka, Kara, Paula, and Tony. So thank you very much. And we love you all and have a great evening. And I will stop the live stream and we can say goodbye on Zoom.